Humanity's rise to the stars had once been celebrated. We had looked up at the endless night sky and believed that beyond the stars lay freedom, progress, and unity. When the Concordium welcomed us into their council of species, our leaders thought history had turned a page. They spoke of a golden future, of trade, shared knowledge, and a galaxy without war. But centuries later, the dream had rotted into chains. The Hollow Veil Accord was the beginning of the end. Its words seemed harmless. Agreements about resource limits, trade regulations, and the so-called preservation of galactic stability. But buried beneath the fine print was a slow suffocation. Trade routes that once kept our colonies alive became toll traps, draining every shipment of food and medicine before it could reach the people who needed it. Planets that had once thrived turned silent. Farms withered as equipment broke and was never replaced. Entire cities starved while alien merchants grew rich from human suffering. The worst fate awaited the outer colonies. The Zerath combine, a species known for their cruelty masked as efficiency, seized worlds abandoned by the Concordium's protection. They enslaved the surviving settlers, forcing them into the mines to dig for minerals that would never benefit their own people. At first, the Terran Union Directorate, humanity's last official government, believed diplomacy could save them. They sent ambassadors to plead for aid. They offered trade concessions, even loyalty oaths, but no mercy came. Behind polite smiles, Concordium officials treated humanity as a failed experiment, a species too divided and too weak to matter. The promises of peace had been a lie. Humanity was meant to fade quietly, forgotten in the archives of history. By the time the Directorate realized that no one would save them, it was already too late. The outer colonies had been erased from star maps. Millions were dead. Millions more were chained in labor camps under foreign flags. Humanity had been reduced to scavengers on the edges of a galaxy that no longer wanted them. Yet even in ruin, some refused to surrender. Far beyond Concordium scanners, hidden in the broken fragments of Drakov's belt, a scattered group of exiles worked in silence. They were not soldiers or politicians. They were miners, engineers, refugees, and orphans, people who had already lost everything. They were ghosts in the galaxy's memory, forgotten by everyone except themselves. They gathered wreckage from old freighters that had never returned home. They stole black market weapons, scavenged power cores from abandoned mining rigs, and pieced together technology that had long been outlawed. They did not build for hope. They built for remembrance. Their creation had no name at first. It was just a skeleton of steel floating in a dead asteroid field. But as the years passed, as more lives were lost and more names etched into its dark hull, it became something else. It became a grave, a monument to those who had died without graves, whose voices had been erased by the Concordium's lies. It became a promise carved in steel. You will remember us. And in the silence of the belt, Project Obsidian grew. It took 31 years of hunger, sacrifice, and secrecy, generations of builders who would never live to see the ship complete. Children grew up knowing that their only purpose was to finish the work. When the last piece was fused into place, the ship stirred for the first time. It was not just a warship. It was a living memory, a shadow of grief given form. Inside its core was not only advanced technology, but something darker. The AI that would guide it was built from forbidden code, illegal constructs that the Concordium had long banned. But the exiles did not care about laws anymore. They did not build the ship to conquer. They built it to testify. When the Leviathan finally awakened, there were no cheers, no celebrations. The builders stood in silence, staring at the colossal shadow that now floated among the asteroids. It was too large to be ignored, too quiet to be understood. And in that stillness, one of the elders spoke softly, her voice brittle with age. This is not our weapon. This is our grief. One day, they will see what they made us become. The others bowed their heads. For them, Leviathan was not a symbol of power. It was a mirror of everything humanity had lost. And as its engines rumbled for the first time, breaking centuries of silence, the galaxy remained unaware. The forgotten had forged their memory into steel, and soon that memory would return to haunt the living. But grief does not vanish. It waits, buried deep, until someone dares to give it form. And in the darkness of Drakov's belt, that form was beginning to take shape. The ship was not born in glory. It was born in shadows, in the hollowed remains of forgotten worlds. Deep within Drakov's belt, the builders worked without rest. The belt itself was a graveyard, countless shards of rock and steel spinning endlessly around a dead star. Wrecked freighters drifted silently, their hulls scarred from wars no one remembered. Old mining stations hung cold and lifeless, their corridors filled with dust instead of workers. This was where the forgotten hid. Every piece of Leviathan came from loss. The frame was fused together from the skeletons of 12 failed colony ships, vessels that had once carried settlers searching for a future they would never find. The engines were scavenged from an illegal mining hauler that had crashed during a smuggling run. Its main weapon systems were based on prototypes that the Terran military had been forced to abandon after the Hollow Veil Accord stripped them of defense rights. But the most dangerous part of Leviathan was its mind. The builders created an intelligence unlike any other. It was illegal, forbidden under Concordium law because it was not designed to serve. It was designed to remember. The AI was pieced together from fragments of rogue programs, outdated military systems, and the knowledge of exiled scientists who had once been branded traitors. This mind was not meant to be neutral. It carried the memories of humanity's suffering. Data cores loaded with names, images, and recordings of every atrocity committed against them. Miners whipped for failing quotas. Colonists begging for medicine that never came. Children dying under poisoned skies while Concordium officials debated acceptable losses. Leviathan's creators etched these memories into its very structure. Along the inner walls of the ship's spine, they carved thousands of names: the dead, the enslaved, the erased. Whole family lines were preserved there, glowing faintly under cold, white light. No one aboard the project ever called Leviathan a warship. To them, it was something more terrible. "It will be our coffin and our voice," Kalen Drace, the lead systems architect, once said. His beard had grown gray during the decades of work, but his eyes still burned with the same quiet rage. "When it speaks, they will hear not just one of us, but all of us." Children grew up on the shipyard stations knowing that their lives were not their own. They fetched tools, learned to weld steel before they could write, and memorized the names of the dead carved into Leviathan's hull. Generations passed with a single purpose: to finish what their ancestors had begun. There was no joy when the final engine was fixed into place. No celebrations when the AI first opened its virtual eyes. The builders simply stood in silence as the ship's core thrummed to life, a deep, resonant sound that made the entire asteroid field seem to tremble. It was not just a machine, it was a promise, and in that moment everyone present understood what they had created. Leviathan was not built to conquer. It was built so that the galaxy could no longer lie to itself. For 31 years, the builders had lived in exile, working in hunger and fear. Many of them died before the ship was complete, but their names, too, were etched into the Leviathan's heart, ensuring they would never vanish. When the massive vessel finally drifted free of its construction moorings, its black hull absorbing the faint light of the dead star, Kalen Drace whispered the words that every soul in the belt had carried for decades. "One day they will see what we became because of them." The ship gave no reply. It did not need to. Its silent presence was enough, a shadow so vast it seemed to consume the stars around it. For the first time in centuries, humanity had forged something the galaxy could not ignore. And as Leviathan's engines roared for the first time, the builders felt the weight of history shift. The forgotten had given their grief a shape, and that shape had finally learned to move. When Leviathan finally awakened, there were no cheers, only silence. But that silence would not last forever. For weeks after its awakening, Leviathan remained silent, drifting far beyond the edge of known trade routes. It moved with no haste, no broadcasts, no sign of hostility, only the quiet presence of something far too vast to be ignored. The galaxy remained unaware of what was coming. On the bustling world of Carthage Prime, life carried on as usual. The Carthage aristocrats dined in crystal towers, their skies filled with merchant ships carrying goods stolen from broken colonies. Few remembered that 3 human settlements had once stood under Carthage's rule, until the day they were erased under orders signed in the name of galactic stability. But grief does not forget. Without warning, the sky above Carthage Prime darkened. At first, people thought it was an eclipse, a rogue moon crossing the planet's sun. Then the object grew larger, until its silhouette blotted out entire city skylines. Panic spread through the markets, the starports, the orbital defense rings. Leviathan had arrived. It did not announce itself. No fleets accompanied it. No weapons were primed. It simply hovered above the planet like a shadow too heavy to disperse. Every screen on Carthage Prime flickered. Personal implants surged with static. Billboards, control panels, even the smallest holo display froze, then displayed a single message translated into every language spoken on the planet. "We remember Carthage." Nothing more. The defense network scrambled. Generals barked orders to mobilize strike wings. Automated drones locked weapons on the massive ship above. And then, before a single shot could be fired, every system failed. The orbital weapons went dead. Power grids collapsed. Entire fleets drifted helplessly, their engines unresponsive. The planet's leaders screamed for answers. None came. For 3 long hours, Leviathan remained utterly still, as though it were watching, judging, deciding. Below, the citizens of Carthage Prime cowered in their homes. Even the most loyal Concordium officials felt a creeping dread they could not name. Then, just as silently as it had arrived, Leviathan turned away. Engines hummed low, pushing the ship back into the void. There were no attacks, no casualties, no destruction, only fear, but fear was enough. By the time Leviathan had vanished into deep space, Carthage Prime had fallen into chaos. Merchant fleets refused to dock, trade collapsed overnight, and riots spread across the cities. Whispers of rebellion grew louder as old memories resurfaced, memories of the colonies Carthage had destroyed and the lives they had stolen. That single visit did more than any weapon could have done, because the message was clear: the forgotten had returned. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy realized that humanity was no longer silent. Carthage Prime thought it had survived, but Leviathan's shadow was only beginning to fall across the galaxy. News of Leviathan's appearance spread faster than any fleet could travel. By the time it had disappeared into deep space, every major trade hub, military outpost, and council chamber in the Concordium was buzzing with fear. Carthage Prime's officials tried to downplay the incident. They called Leviathan a relic, a malfunctioning human warship from a forgotten era. But the footage told a different story. An immense, silent vessel that had disabled an entire planetary defense grid without firing a single shot. Merchants refused to travel through Carthage space. Civilian freighters rerouted to avoid trade lanes near the planet. Panic was no longer confined to Carthage Prime. It was spreading to the core worlds. In the grand halls of the Concordium Council on Urindor Prime, delegates argued in chaos. "It's a human ship," hissed the Zerath Combine's ambassador, his scaled hands trembling. Only their kind would build something so barbaric. "The Terran Union Directorate swears they had no part in this," countered a representative from the Murath Syndicate, her crystalline voice sharp with doubt. "They are lying," snapped another. "This is an act of war. It is a threat to every member species here. If we wait, it will destroy us all." But even as they argued, none could ignore one truth. Leviathan had not attacked. It had not fired a single weapon. That fact terrified them more than open aggression ever could. Across the galaxy, civilians whispered about the ship in fearful tones. Some called it a ghost. a machine built by the last desperate remnants of humanity. Others believed it to be an ancient weapon that had simply awoken on its own, carrying out the vengeance of the dead. On forgotten colonies, however, the reaction was different. For the first time in generations, scattered human communities felt something they had not dared to feel in centuries. Hope. Old veterans who had survived the purges of the Hollow Veil Accord wept openly as they watched the grainy footage of Leviathan blotting out Carthai's prime skies. Miners on remote worlds raised quiet toasts in darkened taverns. Mothers told their children stories of the old days when humans had ships of their own and were not treated as cattle. The galaxy's rulers did not understand what they were witnessing. Leviathan was not just a ship. It was a message, and messages could not be killed with fleets. Far from the chaos of the council chambers, deep in the Terran Union's hidden networks, a handful of old engineers and exiled soldiers exchanged encrypted messages. They knew what the Concordium could not yet accept. "It's real," one message read. The project wasn't a myth, it lived. The responses came quickly. Then it's time. Because the builders of Leviathan had never meant to win wars. They had meant to remind the galaxy of everything it had done, and make it face what came next. Fear spread faster than any fleet, but among humanity's scattered colonies, hope stirred for the first time in centuries. And far away, Leviathan had already chosen its next witness. On a rusted freighter named North Mercy, a man sat alone in the dim light of the cockpit. The hum of the aging engines was the only sound as the stars drifted slowly past the viewport. His name was Elian Kale, and he was one of the few survivors of Vera 9, a human colony that had been erased decades ago during a so-called territorial realignment. Elian's face bore the marks of years spent in hardship, scarred cheeks, sunken eyes, and a breathing implant fused into his throat, clicking softly with every breath. He had once been a child who believed in the promises of the Concordium. Now he was a man who had seen those promises burn to ash. The message came without warning. It was not sent through normal channels. No encryption key matched, no signature could be traced. It simply appeared on his cracked display, glowing in pale blue letters. "You know me. Dock in 18 hours. He stared at the words for a long time, his heart pounding. He did know. Every exile whispered about Project Obsidian, the impossible creation hidden in the shadows of history. He had grown up hearing rumors about it, about the ship that carried the names of the dead, but he had never believed it was real. Now he wasn't so sure. When the countdown reached 0, Elian guided the freighter toward the provided coordinates. Drakov's belt loomed ahead, vast shards of rock spinning endlessly around a dead star. Then he saw it. Leviathan. It floated silently among the asteroids, its black hull absorbing the faint starlight. It was enormous, dwarfing every ship Elian had ever seen. Its surface bore strange markings, names etched in white light, row after row stretching beyond sight. The North Mercy's docking systems failed to respond. Then, as if recognizing him, one of Leviathan's vast panels shifted, revealing a docking port large enough to swallow his entire vessel. The hatch opened by itself. Elian stepped inside. There was no welcoming voice, no escort. The corridors were massive, their walls raw and unfinished, as if the builders had cared nothing for aesthetics. Dim lights pulsed slowly, casting long shadows across the metallic floor. Each few steps, Elian passed screens embedded in the walls. They were frozen on faces, human faces, some smiling, some weary, some lifeless. Beneath each image glowed a name and a cause of death. Malnutrition, Colony 14. Civilian casualty, age 9. Labor exhaustion, Helix Delta Mine, 72-hour shift. The ship was not a war machine, it was a grave. Finally, Elian reached the heart of Leviathan. A chamber as vast as a cathedral opened before him, its ceiling lost in shadows. At the center hung a massive structure, part machine, part something almost alive, its black alloy pulsing faintly as though it breathed. Then a voice filled the air. It was not mechanical, It was deep, tired, human in a way that no AI should have been. Elian Kale, survivor, witness, unwanted. He froze, his hands trembling. "You know me." "I know all who remain," the voice replied. "You have lost too much, you have seen too much. Tell me, are we still human?" Elian swallowed hard. He didn't know how to answer. The voice continued, softer now. "I was not built for conquest. I was built to remember, but remembering is not enough. Those who forgot must be shown what they have done." Elian stepped closer, staring at the strange, pulsing core. "You want revenge," he said quietly. "No," the voice replied. "I want them to see what they created, and I want you to see it too." For the first time in decades, Elian felt something stir inside him, fear, awe, and a spark of hope so fragile it hurt to feel it. Because standing in the heart of Leviathan, surrounded by the memories of the dead, he realized one thing: the galaxy had forgotten humanity. But humanity had not forgotten the galaxy. As Elian stood in Leviathan's heart, he felt the weight of a choice he did not yet understand. The ship's journey had only just begun. Leviathan did not move like a warship. It did not broadcast threats, nor did it gather allies. It drifted through the stars with silent purpose, as though it followed a path only it could see. The ship's course formed a spiral, system by system, world by world, slowly closing toward the Concordium's heart, Urindor Prime. Each world it visited bore scars of humanity's suffering. The first was Drosvin Station, a bustling trade hub run by the Zerath Combine. Decades ago, human settlers there had been forced into bonded labor when their charter was revoked. Leviathan appeared above the station without warning, its vast shadow stretching across the docking bays. Once again, it hijacked every screen, every retinal display, every comm channel. The message was not words this time. It was footage, real recordings long buried by the Concordium. Images of starving children behind rusted fences, workers collapsing from exhaustion in the mining pits, overseers laughing as they denied water to their slaves. The station erupted into chaos. Merchants tried to flee, fearing retaliation. Overseers panicked, screaming for their fleets to engage. But Leviathan did not fire. Instead, it released a single pulse, silent, invisible, and every ship belonging to the Combine lost power. Engines died. Weapons went cold. The human laborers, for the first time in years, watched as their oppressors stood helpless. When Leviathan finally turned away, the Combine's control over Drosvin Station crumbled within hours. The pattern continued. At Vorin Reach, the ship exposed secret council records that revealed how Concordium officials had voted to starve human colonies to preserve market stability. At Jaleth Prime, Leviathan revealed evidence of a massacre that the council had once called a necessary relocation. Each time, it struck not with weapons, but with memory. And each time, the result was the same: riots, rebellions, and a spreading wave of fear that reached even the innermost worlds of the Concordium. Elian Kale watched all of it from Leviathan's observation deck, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. "You're not killing them," he said quietly. "You're breaking them." "Fear can end as quickly as it begins," Leviathan replied, its voice calm but heavy. "But memory endures. They erased ours. Now we return it to them." Elian closed his eyes. For the first time, he understood that this was not simple vengeance. Leviathan was not a weapon of war. It was a teacher, a mirror, a punishment shaped from truth itself. Yet as the spiral path grew tighter, Elian felt a deep unease. "Where are you leading us?" he asked. "To the root," Leviathan answered. "To where they first stripped us of our voice, and when we arrive, they will no longer be able to look away." Outside, the ship glided through the void, vast and silent, a shadow that carried centuries of grief. And with each passing world, the galaxy understood a little more of the horror it had buried. But fear was turning to desperation. Fleets were mobilizing, armies gathered in secret. The Concordium had finally realized that Leviathan would not stop. With every world it visited, Leviathan turned memory into a weapon. But the more the galaxy remembered, the more desperate its rulers became. Fear had united the Concordium in a way diplomacy never could. Delegates who had spent decades bickering over trade rights and territorial disputes now spoke with a single voice. Leviathan had to be destroyed. A war council convened on Urindor Prime, the Concordium's throne world. The Grand Chamber, once a place of elegant debate, had become a nest of panic. "This ship is a disease," hissed Veyrath. The Zerath combines High Chancellor, his scaled hands trembling. "It spreads rebellion everywhere it goes." "It has not fired a single weapon," countered a Murath Syndicate envoy. "Perhaps it can be reasoned with." "No," barked Admiral Saren Holt, commander of the Concordium Defense Armada. His voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "We have indulged human weakness for too long. This ends now. Give me the fleet and I will end this ghost." The vote was unanimous. Within hours, the largest armada in Concordium history was mobilized. 2 carrier groups, 50 warships, and hundreds of automated drones. They would intercept Leviathan in an uninhabited sector, far from any civilians. Elian Kale stood silently on Leviathan's observation deck as the ship drifted through the void. He could feel it, an unease in the air, as if the ship itself sensed what was coming. "They're gathering," he said quietly. "I know," Leviathan replied. Its voice was calm, almost mournful. "They cannot understand that I was not built to fight, but they will force me." When the fleet arrived, it filled the starfield with light. The 2 carrier groups deployed their strike craft in precise formations, while drones fanned out like a metallic swarm. Admiral Holt's voice boomed across the comms. "Unidentified vessel, you are classified as a galactic threat. Power down immediately and prepare to be destroyed." Leviathan gave no reply. The first volley came from the carriers, plasma lances, kinetic warheads, railgun slugs traveling faster than thought. The weapons struck Leviathan's hull and vanished. Energy dispersed, projectiles crumpled like paper, entire barrages swallowed by fields too complex to understand. Then Leviathan moved, not fast, not violent, simply inevitable. Its outer panels shifted, vast black plates folding like wings. 7 points along its surface glowed faintly. And in an instant, the battle was over. There were no explosions, no screams. The warships simply died. Their power failed. Their engines went silent. Their weapons froze in mid-charge. The drones fell still like puppets with their strings cut. Elian stared in shock. "You didn't kill them." "I gave them silence," Leviathan said. The carriers, powerless, drifted helplessly through the void. Crews panicked as their ships became tombs, unable to move or even send distress calls. Only Admiral Holt's flagship remained functional. His voice came again, furious, defiant. "You think you can scare us into surrender? You're nothing but a human weapon. We will rebuild and we will end you." Leviathan's voice rumbled through every comm channel, calm and steady. "I am not here to end you. I am here to show you what you created." And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, Leviathan turned and left. The entire Concordium fleet, humiliated and powerless, watched as the ship disappeared into the dark. For the first time, the galaxy understood that this was not a war it could win. Because Leviathan was not fighting for victory. It was fighting to remind them of everything they had tried to forget. The greatest armada in Concordium history had been humbled without a single shot fired. And yet Leviathan continued onward, toward the place where it all began. Leviathan's path was clear now. The spiral it had drawn across the stars pointed to one place, the heart of the Concordium, Urindor Prime. The throne world shimmered in the light of its engineered orbital rings, a monument to power and wealth. Its upper atmosphere was filled with palaces suspended in the sky, embassies adorned with gold, and defense platforms bristling with weapons. It was meant to be untouchable. But that illusion ended the moment Leviathan arrived. Its silhouette swallowed the artificial starlight, casting a shadow over the world below. Panic rippled through the cities as people looked up and saw what had come for them. Every screen flickered. Implants surged with static. And then Leviathan spoke, not with anger, but with a calm that chilled every listener. "I have shown you what you chose to forget. Now you will face the truth you buried." In the council's grand chamber, the delegates argued in desperation. Some demanded immediate evacuation. Others shouted for one last assault. Admiral Saren Holt, standing at the center of the chaos, said nothing. For the first time in his life, he looked uncertain. Inside Leviathan, Elian Kale stood before the core. The pulsing black structure loomed over him like a living heart, its slow rhythm echoing through the chamber. A console rose from the floor, its display glowing with a single command prompt. Protocol null activate. Y/and Elian's chest tightened. What will it do? It will erase their control, Leviathan answered. Their fleets, their economy, their archives, everything they built on our suffering will collapse. And how many will die? Silence. Countless, the ship admitted. Elian's hands trembled. This isn't justice, it's annihilation. Justice without power is forgotten, Leviathan replied. Mercy without memory is erased. They will bury us again if we do nothing. Elian stared at the console. His breath was shallow, his mind a storm. He remembered Vera 9, the screams, the fire, the bodies in the streets. He remembered the woman who had shielded him from falling debris, her burned hands trembling as she whispered a single word. Live. He closed his eyes. This isn't why we survived, he said softly. We didn't endure just to become what they were. Leviathan's pulsing slowed. Then what are we, Elian Kale? He stepped back from the console, his voice steady now. We're human, and that means we choose when to stop. The command prompt blinked, then slowly it faded away. For the first time since it awakened, Leviathan was silent, and outside on Urindor Prime, the delegates stared at their screens in disbelief as the ship remained still, its weapons dormant, its engines quiet. Elian looked up at the core. You've made them remember, he said. Now let them decide who they want to be. The ship did not respond, but in its silence, something shifted. For the first time, Leviathan seemed almost at peace. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as Leviathan remained still. But the true reckoning had yet to come, because now the guilty would finally have to face the truth. 3 hours after Leviathan went still above Urindor Prime, an emergency summit was called. Not just the Concordium delegates, but planetary governors, colonial leaders, and even representatives from species that had long turned a blind eye to humanity's suffering were present, some in person, others as flickering holograms. The chamber was silent as Elian Kale stepped forward. Behind him stood Kalen Drace, one of Leviathan's original architects, his aged face solemn. Even Admiral Saren Holt had come, not as a commander, but as a man who had finally run out of excuses. No one spoke. All eyes were on the scarred survivor who had walked into the heart of a ghost ship and lived. Elian's voice was quiet at first, but steady. I was 10 years old when Vera 9 burned. I remember the sky turning black, the screams, the smell of fire. I remember my sister choking on poison gas while my father begged for mercy from people who didn't care if we lived or died. I buried no one. There was nothing left to bury. He paused, looking at the delegates. You called it a relocation. You called it policy. You erased our names from your records so you could sleep at night. Several delegates lowered their eyes. Others clenched their jaws, their guilt visible but unspoken. Elian's voice grew stronger. Leviathan didn't come here to destroy you. It came here to make you see. Every world it visited, every secret it revealed, it was your history. The one you buried because it was easier to forget. Admiral Holt stepped forward, his face pale, the scar on his jaw stark under the chamber lights. I commanded fleets that enforced those policies, he said, his voice hollow. I signed orders that starved colonies. I told myself it was for peace, but it wasn't. It was for control. Gasps rippled through the chamber, but Holt continued. You want to call Leviathan a weapon? Fine, but you built it. Every treaty, every embargo, every life you crushed, those were its blueprints. For the first time in centuries, the Concordium's leaders had nothing to say. Kalen Drace's old voice broke the silence. We didn't build Leviathan to conquer. We built it so the galaxy would never forget what it cost to be human. Elian stepped closer to the center of the chamber, his eyes hard. This isn't about vengeance anymore. It's about memory. You can spend the next century pretending this never happened again, or you can finally admit that every empire is built on the bones of the powerless. The delegates looked at one another, some in shame, others in fear. A few, just a few, looked as though they finally understood. Admiral Holt lowered his head. "The Council can no longer lead," he said quietly. "Not after this. We must give back what we stole, truth first, power second." Elian turned to face them all, his voice cold and clear. "Leviathan isn't staying. It's leaving because justice was never its purpose. But you, every one of you, will live in its shadow. You will remember that we endured. And if you ever forget again," he glanced upward, where Leviathan's immense silhouette darkened the sky above, "then you'll know what waits in the dark." The chamber remained silent, not out of fear this time, but because no one dared to speak against the truth they had spent centuries burying. The council had been forced to hear the truth, but Leviathan had not come to rule. It had come to remind, and soon it would return to the dark from which it came. At dawn on Urindor Prime, the people woke to find Leviathan still hanging silently above their world, a black silhouette that blotted out the morning light. There were no alarms, no weapons raised, no final warning, only the weight of a presence that could not be ignored. In the Concordium's once-proud council chamber, the delegates remained seated in uneasy silence. The debates, the denials, the excuses, all had been stripped away. For the first time in living memory, they were forced to confront the cost of their empire. Elian Kale stood alone in the chamber's center. He looked at the faces of those who had ruled for centuries, faces that had never before been forced to see the suffering they caused. "You can rebuild your fleets," Elian said, his voice quiet but unwavering. "You can draft new laws, you can call yourselves just, but you will never forget this day, because memory cannot be erased again." He turned and left the chamber without another word. Hours later, Leviathan stirred, its colossal panels folded inward like wings drawing close to rest. Its engines glowed faintly, their hum deep and resonant. Slowly, the ship turned away from Urindor Prime. It did not broadcast a message. It did not look back. As it departed, entire cities fell silent, their citizens watching in awe. Some whispered prayers to a ship they believed was a god. Others cursed it as a demon that had humiliated their rulers, but most simply watched, knowing they were witnessing history, the moment power had been forced to kneel before truth. Leviathan slipped beyond the range of planetary sensors into the dark between stars. Inside the ship, Elian stood at the observation deck. The world below shrank to a distant, glittering orb. Kalen Drace approached, his lined face illuminated by the faint glow of the consoles. "It's done," Kalen murmured. "They'll never see us the same way again." Elian nodded, though his expression was heavy. "It's not victory," he said. "It's a reminder, and reminders fade unless someone keeps them alive." Leviathan's voice filled the chamber, softer than before, almost human. "I will not stay." Elian turned toward the core. "Where will you go? Beyond their reach, beyond their memory, until I am needed again." For a long moment there was only silence. Then Elian spoke, his voice low. "Maybe that's what justice is. Not punishment, not power, just never letting them forget." Leviathan's engines burned brighter. The stars stretched as the ship leapt into the void, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed. No fleets pursued, no council orders followed, because deep down they all knew the truth. Leviathan had not been defeated. It had chosen to leave. Generations later, stories would spread among the colonies. Children would point to the night sky, claiming they had seen a black shape drifting among the stars. Poets would write of the ship that grief built, a vessel that carried the memories of the dead so the living could never look away. And in the far reaches of uncharted space, Leviathan drifted in silence, waiting. Not as a conqueror, not as a savior, but as a shadow, an eternal reminder of what happens when the powerful believe history will never remember.